Hey, hello, my name is Temps, and today we're going to be reading through some of the creepiest paranormal Reddit stories I could find. So if you enjoy these, make sure to subscribe as I have a lot of these on the way. But let's not waste any time as we dive into the first scary story. I was a police officer, and I think I witnessed an actual curse. I used to be a police officer in a city in Virginia. There is one upscale neighborhood in our city with very nice homes. I was always told stories when I was a new officer that there was a doctor who used to live in one of the homes. The story goes, the doctor attempted to perform some type of operation on himself. He numbed his stomach area to make an incision on himself. But since he couldn't feel it, he accidentally cut far too deep and large and accidentally disemboweled himself. When officers and paramedics arrived, he was found barely alive, holding his own intestines, and ultimately died. Fast forward, I was assigned a call about a young female who was found dead by her old sister. When I arrive on scene, is it in the aforementioned nice neighborhood? When I exited my vehicle, I immediately had an uneasy feeling about the house. While nice on the outside, it just had bad energy surrounding it. As I approached the front porch, I noticed countless empty energy drink cans and a Ouija board on the front patio table. Everything about this house just felt wrong. When I was led inside, the family was obviously very distraught. I was told the deceased sister, we'll call her Emily, was in the basement. At this point, another officer had arrived also, and so he stayed upstairs with the family as I entered the basement. The basement wasn't unfinished and was fairly dark, minus 2 pull-string light bulbs, one on each side of the basement. The scene in the basement was similar to the front porch. Energy drink cans were everywhere, and another Ouija board was on a small coffee table. Emily, who was 19 if I remember correctly, was hanging by her neck on a basement rafter. She had hung herself with an exercise band and was swinging back and forth slightly. Her face was blue, bloated, and contorted into a horrible expression. Another officer helped me lift her to bring her down. Emily's family consisted of her mother and father and her older sister. Her parents stated that they had been trying to help her because all she ever did was drink the energy drinks to stay up all hours of the night, playing on the Ouija board. Her sister gave a little more detail about it. Being sisters, she stated they were very close and told each other everything. Her older sister said Emily indeed had been obsessed with the Ouija board, drinking energy drinks to stay up all night and talk to what she believed was her boyfriend, who was dead. Her sister stated Emily had been saying that her boyfriend was begging for her to come join him in the afterlife, and so she believed that is why she did what she did. Now let me reiterate, this house felt wrong. Everything felt bad, and I had a very uneasy, sick feeling being in the basement, and not because of the dead body. Wasn't my first. This is a call that really messed with me for a while. We really never got much more explanation, and as cops, you kind of just have to move on to the next call. 2 weeks later, to the day, I get a call about a car accident with ejection. I head to the call code 1, lights and sirens, and arrive to find a convertible BMW with the top down, which had experienced an obvious, horrible crash and rollover. It was sitting on its wheels, and in the driver's seat was a woman, who clearly had a broken neck, as her head lay almost all the way turned around. Next to the vehicle, about 25 feet away, was a man who had been ejected. Keep in mind, this was a convertible, so he was ejected from the top of the car. He was missing the entire top half of his head, and there were pieces of brain everywhere. I went to close off the scene with yellow table. I walked about 75 yards away from the accident, where I found yet another large chunk of his brain. I'm not trying to be intentionally graphic, but I want to paint the picture of just how bad and violent this car accident was. Upon obtaining the man's ID, I read the information off to dispatch, and then another officer and I both realized the same thing at the same time. This two people were Emily's parents, who 2 weeks to the day just died in a horrible way. Breaking the news to the older sister was heartbreaking. I kept in touch with her for a little while. She had inherited her parents' estate and all of the life insurance money, etc. She ended up selling off everything and buying a different house to try and start over and repair her broken life. However, it doesn't end there. Around a month later, another officer was called after a pedestrian was struck by a car while she was jogging in her neighborhood. And yes, you guessed it, it was the sister. She managed to survive several weeks in a coma, but ultimately did not make it. If you're wondering why the story about the doctor is relevant, the house that Emily killed herself in was the same house the doctor lived in. I don't know what you guys think, but to me, it definitely seems like either that house is cursed or Emily opened up something bad. That was a few years ago now, and I'm no longer a police officer. I moved a couple states away now. Twice now, I have found 2 different Ouija board planchettes on the sidewalk when going to check my mail. I never touch them and usually use a stick or something to push them into the storm drain. Last night, I became a believer. Last night, on the baby monitor, I saw a hand gently patting my 4-month-old son's belly when he was crying to console him. This is not the first time. We don't have squatters. We don't have attic access to any of the bedrooms. We have 2 dogs, and we both work from home. We would know if someone else was secretly living with us. So back towards the end of May, my son was taking a nap in his bassinet in our room. He's just a baby, so he naps very frequently throughout the day. This was probably about 5 p.m. My wife and I were on the deck outside grilling and had the baby monitor out with us. He was starting to wake up and was fussing, so she went inside to go to the bathroom before getting him upstairs. I was bringing food inside as she was walking out of the bathroom, and when she saw me, she stopped dead in her tracks, like she was absolutely shocked to see me. I jokingly said, "I live here too, you know." And that's when she told me she just saw a hand on the baby upstairs a second ago when looking at the monitor. In a sudden panic, when she realized it wasn't me upstairs, we rushed up and didn't find anything or anyone in the room. When she told me, it's not that I didn't believe her. I was just trying over and over to think of a logical explanation for what she saw. Nothing ever made sense. Now, my first thought from an outsider would be, oh, this is common, and is just a glitch showing a previous image on the screen. However, this baby camera and monitor is just for a live feed. There's no recording or on-cam memory. The image is very clear and does not have visual artifacts. If it is out of range, it just goes to a white screen stating the signal has been lost. It does not drop bitrate or get blurry. I also am a videographer for a living, so I am quite familiar with the concept of the artifacts or occasional compression glitch, showing old footage you would see on security cams that has onboard memory. This is not that. In the 4 years of owning and using these cameras for our 2 kids, that has never happened. Fast forward to last night, about a month and a half after that first occurrence. Our son now usually sleeps in his crib in his room until he wakes up for a feeding in the middle of the night. Last night at 3 a.m. on the dot, I heard him crying on the monitor right on my nightstand. I went to nudge my wife to bring him in, but she wasn't in the bed. As I rolled back over to look at the monitor, I saw a hand come into frame from the side. Gently pat him as he was crying for 2 soft pats on the belly, then leave the frame. I didn't think twice, figured it was obviously my wife, and she was maybe prepping the changing table to change his diaper, which is why she patted him instead of picking him up right away. That's when my wife came out of the bathroom in our bedroom, confirming she was not in his room across the house. I immediately stood up and said, "Oh my God, I thought it was you," as the adrenaline was rushing my body. I could barely speak. It's true when people say something happened and they froze or couldn't speak. I was choked up and had a hard time explaining what I meant. Again, we both went into his room and he was alone. Now, what I don't get is if this is a ghost or spirit, why is it making itself seen? We have 2 cameras in the room, his baby monitor, and a blink camera on a shelf that we use just for live viewing, so we can't access previous cloud storage that only triggers with motion. 2 separate occasions of being seen, I feel like goes against all the stories you would hear about spirits and cameras. Not an orb, not a light, a physical hand. This spirit is seemingly friendly, because otherwise, I feel like it wouldn't try to comfort our baby. Has anyone experienced anything like this? Trying not to overreact and take this experience as a guardian angel looking over our baby. There is something in my forest. For context, I'm a 27-year-old woman. My boyfriend and I were able to purchase 15 acres of land this year, right next to a national forest in the Carolinas. It has always been my dream to live in a forest on a mountain, and we were so excited when we found the land. It was priced so low and is a 5-minute drive from the lake, so we, of course, grabbed it up as fast as we could get the loan approved. We put a small mobile home in the middle of the property where we currently live, while we have our home built about 3 acres away. There isn't much built now, just the cement slab and a few metal beams and roof. It's going to be a barn dominium. Now, on to the story. We moved onto the land in late May, and everything seemed great. A few weeks ago, I started taking my 2 dogs out for walks around the forest to check where the property lines were, and also just to enjoy the scenery, as it truly is beautiful. We got to where the property line ended and the national forest began, and I wanted to go further in, as I knew there was a trail you could take nearby that leads to the top of the mountain and a rest area where I planned to call my boyfriend and have him come get me and the dogs. The actual hike itself might take about 5 HRs, and there is a road the rangers take to get to the top, that he could drive up. We were about halfway to the trail, or so I thought, when my German Shepherd, Crush, takes off into the woods barking. He's usually very well trained and comes when called, but he was hell-bent on chasing something. Luckily, my other dog isn't as excitable, and she stayed by me. We went deeper into the forest, looking for my dog, when I heard what I thought was a wild boar. If you have never heard a boar, imagine what you assume a demon crawling out of hell sounds like, and that's pretty much it. I got nervous, as I know a boar could easily gut my dog with their tusk, and started yelling out for Crush to come. I could hear him barking angrily, and we made our way to where the sounds were coming from. I found him looking up, barking and snarling near a large tree, and tried to pull him away. He wouldn't budge. I had to literally pick up this 80-pound dog and shuffle carry him about 100 feet away, where I set him down. My other dog stayed by the tree whining, her tail in between her legs. I called for her to come to me, and she did a 180 and took off in the other direction. I looked up in the tree, but couldn't really see much, so I just chalked it up to one big-ass raccoon. It took about 2 hours, but I was finally back on my land with the dogs. I told my boyfriend about it when we got home, and he recommended not taking them out too far without leashes, as to avoid this again. When I asked him what he thought it was, he agreed either a possum or raccoon, but I told him it didn't explain the boar sound. He just said, "It's the woods, there's a lot of animals," and left it at that. A few days later, I was working from home when my dogs start going nuts. Crush started snarling and jumping up at the window. I yelled for them to stop barking, and since I had to make a call, I let the dogs out with intention to bring them back in afterwards. It took all of 10 minutes. When I opened the door, my little dog was sitting on the porch and bolted inside. Crush was gone. I stepped out and started calling for him, scanning the woods for a big furry black butt. I couldn't see or hear him, so I started into the woods calling for him. I made my way to where the house is being built, and he was standing by the right-hand side of it. I called for him. He stood there, frozen, ignoring me, so I walked over to him when I saw what he was staring at. It was very large and on all fours. I don't know what it was. At first, my initial thought was a manged, hairless bear because of its size, but there aren't bears in that forest. I double-checked before we moved in because I was worried about the dogs getting into it with one. It also was lean, so I know it wasn't a bear, as it was too thin to be one healthy enough to walk. There was fur or hair, but only on the back, and it was either dark brown or black. I couldn't see a face, but could tell it did not have an animal snout. I grabbed Crush's collar and tried to tug him towards the construction, trying not to make any sudden movements. I felt the thing watching me as I led Crush into the middle of the concrete. I didn't take my eyes off it. It was about 10 yards away when I heard the boar noise again. It was coming from it. Crush started barking and jumping towards it, with me attached to him via collar. I just said, "Fuck that," jerked Crush back towards me, and started running back towards the mobile home. I slammed the door, locking it behind me, and grabbed my gun. I called my boyfriend a few times before he answered and started yelling at him to come home. There is something on the property. He was home in 10 minutes and took his truck over to the construction. When he got back, he said he didn't see anything. It's been a couple weeks since then, And this past weekend, I saw it again. My boyfriend had to work late, so I was home with the dogs watching TV when my little one scratched at the door to be let out to potty. Crush followed her out, and I left them to do their business. When I opened the door, little one was shaking and couldn't get in fast enough. She hid under the dining table and refused to come out. I called out for Crush and couldn't see him, as he's a black dog in the woods at night. I grabbed the flashlight and walked the perimeter of the house looking for him. I saw a big, furry black butt at the back of the house where the tree line began and called for him. He didn't move. I started towards him when I heard a bark from behind me. I felt my heart and stomach drop. I wanted to cry because I knew what I was looking at, and it wasn't my dog. He was behind me. I felt this overwhelming feeling of fear and dread and anger, and did something insane and stupid. I yelled at it and threw sticks. I told it to get away from us, get off my land, that I wanted to fucking kill it. I seriously thought I was losing my mind because before I knew it, I was running towards it. I was about 5 feet away when that thing leapt up and into the woods. Its back legs were so long, I thought it was going to kick me. It smelled like earth and rot. I got a better look at the back of its body. It was borderline human-looking. Long limbs, short torso. Luckily, my moment of insanity was over, and my dumbass didn't chase it into the woods. I was mildly pleased with myself that I got it to run away. I started heading back towards Crush and the house when I heard the boar noises again. Only they weren't just behind me, but all around the woods. I told my boyfriend. He thinks I was seeing things. I called my dad, who told me to burn sage on the property and have a shaman come and bless the land, as he thinks it's a skinwalker. He's Blackfoot. I don't know what to do. I bought some cables to hook the dogs to when they go outside so they can't go too far. I carry my gun with me anytime I have to be outside. I love this property. I love the forest and the mountains. I hate that I'm afraid anytime I walk outside. Has anyone seen something like this before? Does anyone have an idea what this is and how to keep it away from us? My boyfriend doesn't go into the woods much, so I doubt if he will ever see it, so I just sound like a crazy woo-woo lady to him. My experiences as a crime scene cleaner. To start out, you need a little backstory to show how I got into this situation. When I got out of high school around 2003, finding a job was difficult, so I took whatever horrible jobs I could to get by. When I found a job cleaning fire and water damage full-time, I was excited to have steady income and start saving. But this quickly turned into a nightmare that I had to endure for almost 2 years. The company I worked for put me on my first job, which was a water damage claim where a basement flooded with sewage. So after a few days of work, we finished, and it was on to the next job. My boss then called me into his office the next morning and told me about a special crew that he was setting up, and asked if I would be the crew leader supervising 3 other guys that were just hired. I found this strange, as I had only been working there a total of around 3 days, but figured my work ethic was already paying off and I would get a raise. I only made 10 an hour to start. Not only did I not get the raise, but I got no training in the new position other than a work van with cleaning material and the phone numbers for the 3 new guys that also were hired in to do fire water damage cleanup. The boss told me what tools were best to use and what cleaning products to use to sanitize, along with where everything was located in the van. with hazmat suits and respirators. But he was vague about what kind of things I would clean up. He just said the situations were always different, and I would get detailed instructions each job. He called my position CSC crew leader. The boss told me that I would never have to see the deceased, as the coroner would have the remains gone by the time my crew got there, and to use my logic to determine what needed to be removed from the homes and what could be cleaned. The first job I had in my new position, which the boss told me about when I got to the office, was cleaning up the remains of an elderly man or woman who died in their house and had been laying in chair. When we arrived, the coroner had me come inside to show me a few things that were considered hazardous material and needed to be removed due to the risk of disease. I guess my boss knew a few people from the county coroner's office, and much of the work came from their recommendations. Not only was the deceased still in the house, but was fully visible to me and the other guy, and you could smell the rot through the masks, as the house had no AC, and this was mid-June. The coroner was backed up and waiting on additional people to show up to load the body, as it was falling apart. And I called the body it, because I honestly couldn't tell if it was male or female, and was trying not to look too long as it was disturbing. The other 3 guys I worked with handled it well, but 2 got sick from the smell and has to go outside to puke. We all waited outside after the coroner showed us the chair, the fluids that leaked into the carpet, and the basement where the fluids went through the subfloor and puddled on some boxes in the basement. The coroner's support arrived and took the deceased out, and me and the crew started working. After about 5 minutes, weird things started to happen. The first of which was when I began to disassemble the chair. I had removed the back of the chair and was putting it into the special hazmat bags that I was given. And the base started to rock when I was about 10 feet away, putting the bag with the back of the chair by the front door. Nobody else was in the same room as the other guys were in the basement dealing with moving boxes. I brushed it off and took apart the base of the chair as much as I could. And when I got it into the bag, I got a chill up my back and then began feeling sick. I just figured it was the shock of what I was cleaning hitting me and pushed on, even though the chill was strange as I was very hot in full hazmat in June. Next was removing the carpet and assessing the floor to see if it would be able to be cleaned, or if I had to remove a section of the floor. So I called the boss to ask him, and he told me just to pour the special cleaner on the area to soak into the floorboards, and it would be fine. So I got it out of the truck where he said it was and brought it inside. When I got inside, all 3 of the guys in the basement were scrambling to get out of the basement, tripping over each other, and all 3 ran outside. When I asked them what was up, all 3 said there was someone in the cluttered basement, and they assumed it was a homeless person or junkie. Detroit has many issues with these kinds of things. I listened at one of the open windows to the basement. It's kind of the first thing we did when we started working. Open any window possible. Prop the doors open. So maybe someone got inside then, or possibly before we got there and was hiding. After listening a few minutes and hearing nothing, me and another of the workers went inside, armed with a mag light and a piece of metal fence post, and searched the basement. Nothing was down there but the footprints of the shoe covers we used. But when we started up the stairs, we heard a horrible hacking cough from somewhere in the basement. When we looked for it, there was nothing. But the corner of the basement had a bunch of dust stirred up like someone was moving things very recently. That weirded us both out. We called the guys back in and they got back to the boxes. But all of them kept feeling like they were being touched while throwing away material from the boxes that got fluids on them. I went back to my upstairs job, but found that the cleaner I put next to the floorboards was gone, and I started getting frustrated as it was the only jug I had of this cleaner. And I clearly remember it being set next to the area before the guys ran up the stairs, and my attention was redirected. I began to take out trash, figuring I would find it eventually. Or the basement guys took it for the floor, and I found it on its side, behind the bag that had the back of the chair. This is impossible. There were like 6 other bags in front of this one near the front door, and this was a gallon bottle of cleaner. Again, I got a chill, but this one was brought on by what sounded like a whisper that I could not make out the words to. Cleaned the floorboards and moved out trash. Job complete. That night, each member of my crew had a dream about an older man telling us that we are not welcome in his home, touching his belongings, and we need to leave. In my dream, I was alone in his house. The old man cried and told me I was destroying his things, and he couldn't replace anything. He was trying to push me out of his house, but it was like I was ignoring him. Even when he would push me and scream at me, no reaction from me. He then threw my cleaner into the garbage pile I had made by the front door, exactly where I found it. 2 of the 3 guys in the crew told me their dreams about the old man pushing them as they went through boxes of ruined pictures and other old stuff that needed to be thrown out due to the risk of disease from his fluids. They also said it was like they had no control and were on autopilot. They said they were so sad, but couldn't do anything. The thing that got me about the dreams of the other 2 guys was they both said the man was getting so upset that he began violently coughing, and that the man kept grabbing their arms when they would touch boxes or throw things into the trash. Neither of the guys were in the house when me and the other guy heard the coughing from the basement. The guy that went into the basement with me said he had a dream, but all he remembered was waking up sad, like he did something wrong, and had a horrible coughing fit, which might just be a coincidence, but I connected it in my mind as relating to the other dreams. We all talked about it and came to the conclusion that we were all just having a reaction to a situation, and it was nothing more than our brains coping with what we had to do. I'm very into psychology, so I rationalized it the best I could, and we hoped for better assignments the next day. Next few jobs were not so bad. Cleaning up blood at a home invasion, no casualty, but huge mess. Then there was a few other bloody crime scenes with casualties, but nothing notable happened. About 2 weeks into the job, we began to learn the tricks of the trade and were split into 2 different groups that I was responsible to manage as crew leader, so I would have to go to different sites if the other 2 guys had an issue or didn't know what to do. I thought I was getting used to the job, as well as the other guys, as we had no other experiences like the first job, but I was wrong. The next job that there was activity was a suicide of a man that was middle-aged. The coroner had already removed the body, but it was a mess. The guy had shot himself with what I think was a large caliber handgun or shotgun, as the spray was everywhere in the basement in like a second living room. There were skull fragments lodged in drywall, brain matter all over, and again, he was not found for a bit, so the smell was horrible. First step in cleaning, this was using our backpack vacuum cleaner to suck up all the biomaterial. The coroner told us when we went in that he and his partner were extremely uneasy in the house, and it felt strange. And we immediately started getting a claustrophobic, suffocating feeling when we went into the basement as well. To make matters worse, the family of the man had came over and were crying upstairs, but the vacuum noise helped to cancel out that. While I was cleaning, the power to the lights went out, and it was completely pitch black. This was strange, because my vacuum was still powered. My crewmate started screaming at this point, so I turned off my vacuum and climbed off my ladder. I thought maybe he touched a wire to the lights, but when my vacuum unit was turned off, he was still screaming, and I could hear things being knocked over. I started fumbling around for my flashlight on my tool belt and yelled for my friend, asking what was going on. But all I got back was panicked screaming. Then I saw in the pitch black something darker that was moving in my direction, and I will admit, I freaked out. I slipped, trying to back up, still looking in my belt for the flashlight, and found it when my back hit the basement wall. I turned on the light, aimed at the blackest shape I have ever seen. And when the light turned on, I saw the shape of a man wearing a flannel shirt, beard, and an expression like he was about to attack me. Then it was just gone. My crewmate was behind where the entity was, sitting on the floor, rocking with his hands on his head. When I approached, he picked up his flashlight off the ground and turned it on, then ran up the stairs and outside and threw up. I followed behind him, asking if he was okay and why he was screaming. I thought I just imagined the entity and the man because his screaming scared me. But he told me that he was scrubbing the wall and felt something pulling on something in his tool belt, and he thought it was me. But when he turned around, the lights went out, and he was engulfed by what he said was like dark smoke, and he immediately could not breathe and was struggling to move. He managed to pull his flashlight out, but it was knocked out of his hand like his wrist was grabbed with force, and he managed to scream. When he screamed, trinkets started falling off an entertainment center that was about 3 feet to his side, and the black smoke moved back. But he was close to passing out from exertion. He also said he lost hearing and didn't know that any noise came out when he started screaming, and that the stuff falling off the shelves was landing on him. And that's why he was covering his head. He said it felt like a weight was lifted off him when the dark smoke backed up. But he felt sick right away, and the light from my flashlight made the sick feeling increase. We took an early lunch where he just sat there, pale as ever, and didn't say much, other than he said he breathed in that smoke and didn't feel right. I got him some Gatorade, and his color started to come back. I never told him I saw a man when I turned on my light, because we still needed to finish, and I didn't want to put that in his head since he never mentioned seeing it. When we went back, the lights in the basement were on again. Half the things that fell from the shelves were back on the entertainment center, and the TV was on baseball. There was also a different smell in the room, similar to burnt hair. My worker stayed a half hour got sick again, and went home for the day, leaving me alone to finish, which I didn't want to do, but had to, as the other guys had their own job. After cleaning up everything with my vacuum, I began scrubbing the old blood, which is hard after it congeals, mix in brain matter, and it is like glue, even with cleaner. While I was finishing up, I kept seeing the shape of a person, always in the side of my vision. Each time I would smell that strange burnt hair scent, and a few times I also felt like a force was pulling at items on my belt. Not sure what item, as there were several things in my belt. When I finished the job, I went to use the bathroom upstairs, and in the hallway along the way, I heard like muffled crying or moaning. I froze up and stayed still, thinking maybe a family member had came back, and when I panned around, there was nothing. But I saw a picture on the wall of a man with a beard wearing a flannel. Several other pictures in the hallway of other scenarios of the same man. Different flannels with deer or fish or family. I had not seen a picture of that man, as I had not been anywhere else in the house with a bathroom. Nor did I use the bathroom downstairs because pulling off the hazmat stuff is a pain. As I was securing the house, closing all windows, locking doors, and shutting down every light, but the front porch light, I saw the front curtain move, and again saw the darker than black form in the front window. The last experience I will share in this thread happened mid-July in a very bad area in Detroit. There had been an incident where a guy supposedly tried to abduct a child, was stopped by people in the neighborhood who beat the man very bad, and he escaped to his house, where the neighborhood people quickly called police, and civilians surrounded the man's house to prevent escape. The police response time in this area is horrible, and the people were throwing rocks through the man's window and damaged his car. The man was hurt bad by the mob, and was hurt by a rock or glass, and died in the home. This is assumption by DPD. From what the police officer told me, it was a misunderstanding, and the man picked up a girl that was injured riding her bike, and some kids that knew her told their parents that the man was kidnapping her, and people overreacted, and the man was brutally beaten. The cleanup was pretty simple to do. We secured windows, cleaned up blood and bodily fluid. But as soon as I entered the house, I just felt wave after wave of fear and sadness, like I have never felt this before. And it hit in waves that made my legs weak. My working buddy who was there showed up late and didn't get the story from the cop like I did, but experienced the same feelings I had. The whole time we were there, we saw a form darting around corners like it was watching us, then hiding. It was similar to like a small bit of fog or mist. We also heard very slight cries for help coming from several areas in the house, and also what sounded like, "Please stop," and long "No" a few times. The crowd came back and yelled at the house also, and when this was going on, the activity in the house increased, and we could hear running footsteps go up the stairs, a door slam, and it sounded like the front door would open and close, but we never saw any of the doors move. The path of the footsteps sounded like from the front door, through living room, to the bathroom, to stairs, to the upstairs bungalow room. The part that really got me was I could feel the floor impacts that felt like the vibrations of someone running past me when I was cleaning the areas. And each time I would be hit by like one of those waves of fear and sadness. When we left the house, there were a few people on porches hanging out like is usual during summer, and the people were still hostile and yelling random things, but directed at us as we loaded the van and took off hazmat suits. We ignored this, but before we had loaded all the material from the house into the van and locked the house, the front door slammed hard enough to sound like a gunshot, which scared me and my crew member, along with the people on the front porch, to the point where they went inside. The front door deadbolt was somehow locked, and we could not get it open. I think it was a different key than the knob, so we ended up leaving several boards in the house that were left over from boarding a few of the windows. The feeling of relief when I left the house was like night and day. Inside I was anxious, scared, paranoid, and just really down, which could be due to knowing the story. But when I got outside, it was like flipping a light switch. I immediately felt better, and me and the other guy in my crew were joking and laughing about dumb stuff and normal 19 and 20-year-old shenanigans. I have many of these stories written down in detail in a journal I started after the first 3 months of working at this job. I talked to the guys on the cruise and got other strange stories from them too. I know that some of this could very well be formed by my subconscious mind to cope with traumatic situations, but some of it has no explanation. And when I hear other members of my crew tell me their stories when they haven't been influenced by mine, that is a horse of a different color. When I have time, I will pull out the journal and give more of my experiences. The job got way worse when I started the journal after 3 months in. Several experiences with what I think was paranormal. Many situations that stressed my mental state to the point where my mask of sanity started to slip. In the end, I worked at this place for almost 2 years, and of my crew, all died. 2 from suicides, 1 from drug overdose that could have been intentional, but we will never know. I just know that when these 3 guys, my age, around 19 and 20, started this job, all were normal, well-adjusted guys with no cares in the world other than girls, parties, and working. I watched each one of them slowly drain their joys and passion for life, and I know this sounds bad, but each one that died was considerate enough to die in a clean way, most likely so another person wouldn't have to see the horrible thing that we all saw so often. Got lost in the woods for 8+ hours as a little girl and saw something unexplainable. I grew up in a densely forested rural area in Central Virginia, and like most kids my age, 10 at the time of this story, I spent a lot of time playing in and around the woods. My best friend and I had found a creek one day while exploring different deer trails through the woods. This creek we happened on was a very rare find and the perfect spot for us to play. It was wide and deep enough to swim around in and had nice, soft, mossy banks on either side to rest on after we had tired ourselves out. The water was cool and clear, no copperheads, and no mosquitoes because the water was constantly running. We were psyched. After a few hours of swimming, we had to walk back home for lunch, but made plans to pack lunch the next day so we could have a picnic on the creek banks and spend the whole day there. The next morning, we set out for the woods at around 1 p.m., planning to have the picnic first and swim after. We entered at the same spot we had the previous day and followed what we thought was the same deer trail. It was not. At the point where we should have found the creek, we walked into a small clearing that was covered in huge, thick ferns. We had definitely never walked past this before. So, being both hungry and tired of walking, we decided to eat in the clearing. We laughed and played around there for a while, spitting watermelon seeds at each other from our lunch. It was an absolute blast, and we were both in wonderful, giddy moods. That all changed, however, as soon as we packed up and set back out to find the creek. As we walked on, the woods started to feel darker and colder. We got skittish, and I noticed my friend kept whipping her head around to look behind us. After about a half hour of walking, we came up on what looked like an entire overgrown bathroom. Sink, toilet, and bathtub, all sitting arranged together and covered in ivy. It's pretty common to find weird shit like this in the middle of the woods, so we just walked on and made jokes to lighten the mood, calling it Bigfoot's bathroom. After another hour of walking and not seeing anything we recognized, we started to panic. Instead of trying to reach the creek, we were now just trying to find our way back home, or out of the woods at least. I told her we should follow the sun, and eventually we would come up on a road or someone's property where we could find help. She insisted on another way, and we began yelling at each other out of fear. And, let's be honest, little girl bossiness. I told her if she thought she was so right, she should just go her way and we would see who got out first, so we split up. Now, as an adult, I fully acknowledge I was being a stubborn brat, and also an idiot. Worst possible thing we could have done. Not 10 minutes after splitting up, I began to hear someone walking maybe 100 feet behind me. Thinking it was my friend deciding to go my way after all, I slowed down so she can catch up to me. Instead, whatever it was matched my pace. I slow down. It slows down. I stop. It stops. This went on for hours. The whole time I was going back and forth on whether or not it was in my head, or there was really something following me. I picked up a big stick, swung it a few times to make sure it was sturdy if I had to hit someone, and trucked on. As it began to get dark, I came up on something that made my heart sink into my stomach. It was Bigfoot's bathroom. I had just walked in a huge circle for hours, despite being 100% sure I was following the setting sun west the entire time. Confused and frustrated, I sat down on a log and just screamed my little heart out while smacking my whoop-ass stick repeatedly into the ground. As I tried to collect myself, I heard the footsteps again, walking up on me from behind. I called out my friend's name as loud as I could. No answer. Then, after a short pause, the steps began to run towards me. I jumped up and booked it fast as I could in the opposite direction. Now, this is the truly horrifying part, which I typically omit while telling people this story. As I was sprinting through the darkening woods, I began to hear what I thought were church bells. I looked up to see the darkest, deepest cloud I have even seen in my life. In the middle, it was so black, it was like looking into the night sky, and the dark gray around it seemed to be swirling. It gave me a horrible feeling to look at, almost like the nausea you get when looking through binoculars too long. What sickened me further is that I realized the sound of the bells was coming through the hole in the cloud. They were deafeningly loud. I mean, really booming out of this thing. When I realized this, I stopped dead in my tracks. I felt a sense of absolute and overwhelming dread that has gone unmatched in all my 24 years on this planet. Something in my head began screaming that if I did not run away from whatever the hell that cloud was, no one would ever see me again. I would be gone. I did not want to run toward the thing chasing behind me either, though, so I made a sharp right and took off away from both. It was now completely dark, and I was running blind through the woods, smacking through branches, wheezing, and tripping every few feet for what seemed like another hour, until I smacked into something low and flew over it, hitting the ground so hard all the air in my lungs was knocked out of me. As I lay there trying to recover, I realized I couldn't hear the bells anymore. Then my eyes adjusted more to the dark, and I realized what had just made me go ass over teeth was an old fence. Grabbing hold of it, I prayed it would lead me to a farm, and sure enough it did. I walked up over a hill about a mile to the back of the farmhouse, explained what had happened, and the farmer graciously gave me a ride back home. I was covered head to toe in scrapes, oozing blood, and more exhausted than I had ever been in my life, but I was finally safe. It was past 9 p.m. when I finally walked through my front door. My friend had gotten back shortly after we split, and figured I had as well, so hadn't told anybody I was lost, and my family just figured I was still out after dark, which wasn't uncommon for me. They were shocked when I walked in, beat up and crying. Nobody had been looking for me at all. To this day, I wonder how long they would have waited to come find me if I hadn't been lucky enough to find the fence, and if it would have been too late. My experiences with the Bell Witch haunting. I lived in Adams, Tennessee, growing up from about ages 14, 18, 2004 to 2008. A couple of weeks after my family and I moved there, something unexpected happened. I was mowing on my dad's tractor with a big 8 feet wide back-end mower. I was going down a hill when my horizon line violently was thrown around as the tractor tires hit something. I disengaged the mower, pulled the tractor around at the base of the hill I had just gone down. My blood went cold as I look up through the swath I had just cut, like a buzzer going down the middle of someone's head, making a lane in the grass. In that lane were 4 Native American burial graves. My parents started reaching out to anyone who might be able to help us identify the graves. Anthropologists, historians, accredited people, etc. Those people unanimously agreed that these 4 graves were from the Trail of Tears. They corroborated this from what I remember because of how the graves were laid. Very, very shallow, with a giant slab of stone where a gravestone would be. The fact that they were interned on a hillside to keep the water from sinking in and raising the bodies, since they had to bury them so quickly, and many other reasons. I consider myself a very logically driven and rationally minded person. Basically, I let my empirical senses try to explain something before I'll open myself to other possibilities. Yet, there were things that happened to me and my whole family that we weren't able to rationalize with the scientific mindset or anything logical. Event 1. The activity in our house started shortly after the mowing incident. We heard heavy knocking and pounding on the brick outer wall of the house. Encircling the house, no matter where you were in the house, you could hear the knocking. Some nights, I would hear running footsteps accompanying the pounding. This activity happened nearly every night. As the nights passed, I started feeling a heavy presence in my room, a suffocating one, like a heavy weight sitting on my solar plexus constantly. Whatever was happening decided to latch onto me. Event 2. Things continued to escalate. One night, I was letting my golden retriever out to go pee. We had a ranch-style house overlooking the Red River. The door we were exiting was on the back side of the house facing the river. As I open the door, I start hearing faint whispering something, akin to leaves being blown, scratching across the ground. I looked up at the trees to see if the wind was blowing. Everything was perfectly still. It was fall in Tennessee, so tons of leaves on the ground. They were not moving either. The scratchy, blowing leaf noise continued, but as it continued, it grew closer and louder. It sounded like a language of some sort, like, how'd you imagine an incantation or something nefarious in the tone of the sound? I looked down at my golden retriever. All of the hair on her back was standing up, and she was snarling like a rabid wolf, yet not barking, just kind of frozen in a fear response. I started getting extremely nauseous and could smell sulfur. I was completely frozen when my dog launches herself through the door's threshold and starts gnashing her teeth mid-air, snarling and chomping. The voices were now coming from directly in front of me. I could hear them as if someone was standing there a foot or two away. I grab my dog mid-air and pull her quickly inside, slam the door, and threw the deadbolt into place. The door and frame shook violently as a vicious pounding started hammering on the threshold. I ran with my dog to the center of the house, flipping on every light along the way. We sat there alone all night until the sun came up. Ginger, my golden retriever, laid across my lap the entire night, pressing into me while she whimpered for hours. All I could do was pet her and try to calm her down, which was also helping me regulate. This was impossible, though. The entire night until sunrise, the back door was thumping. Event 3. It happened when I was coming home from football practice. I had all my gear in a gym bag over my left shoulder. This is important because of how I entered the house. As I closed the front door behind me, I began sitting down the gear bag from my left side, which caused me to look right. The room, when you first walked in, was our library, where we had a leather couch, chair, piano, bookshelves, and a wooden rocking chair. There was something sitting in the rocking chair. My peripheral vision caught it first, the chair going back and forth. As my vision centered on the chair, there was a humanoid-looking shape sitting there, head glancing downward at the book it was holding. Long black hair drawn down over its head and completely void of light. To picture what I saw, imagine the silhouette of a person, but rather a void of light. The light coming in around the edges of it seemed to be eaten up by the presence void, as the light spilled over the contour edges of the humanoid shape, like how black holes are visualized, almost exactly. It felt like I had jumped off a bridge into ice-cold water. I blasted myself backwards against the door, screaming, and fell down. As I was falling, I saw the void blur suddenly as it shot across the walls of the house and out through a huge bay window overlooking the river. My golden retriever was in the next room, and she sprinted to chase the shadow across the walls, barking and clawing at the walls. After it left through the window, my dog came to me and laid on my lap until my parents got home. Event 4. I was fishing with my cousin Jack on the river by our house. We were right on the bend of a river, so the moon would be shining on both sides of the river, racing out at two lines like a 90-degree angle from the house. Super beautiful when you weren't on edge. The reason I bring this up, there was a lot of light on the river that evening. Jack was about 10 or so at the time. He reaches up and taps me. "Does that lady need help?" I looked to where he was pointing, and there was a pale woman dressed in white clothes going back and forth, picking up stones just to the left of us across the river. I had seen her many times before around the property, and whenever I would get close, she would disappear behind a tree, or something similar would happen. Knowing this, I told Jack as calmly as I could that it was time for dinner, and he needed to go up to my mom immediately, in an attempt to not scare him. When I walked him up and made sure he was on his way, I looked back over and she was gone, but I could hear a splashing in the water below. Event 5. Myself, my dad, his friends, and some other family members were staked out along the river bend on the gravel bar beneath the rise to our house. Nothing out of the ordinary at first. It was July 4th, and we were having an actual good time for a change. We were all spread out about 15 yards from each other. Each man had a low-end gas Coleman lantern. As the sun was setting, my dad looks over at me like something was bugging him. He told me later he felt like someone had just thrown a bucket of ice water over him before it began. The sun had just gone down when this happened. In unison, all the lanterns were cranked up full blast, then just as quickly became barely a flame. Then the fires roared to life again, down to barely a flame, roared to life. Then they went completely out. Right as the flames went out, we heard the most God-forsaken scream by some woman across the river. Whatever it was kept on screaming, despite our best attempts to call out to help. As her scream reached a crescendo, it sounded like what I could only imagine a person's throat being cut interrupted her scream. The sound of a dead weight fall of a human body tumbled down the hillside across from us and splashed violently into the water. At this point, all the guys had their flashlights out. That's when something started swimming and splashing around in the water on both sides of the river bend. The splashing receded towards the opposite gravel bar, and whatever it was got out and started pacing back and forth across the rocks there. We were pointing all of our flashlights to where the sound was coming from, but we couldn't identify where it was originating. It's safe to say we were running up the hill at this point. We all got inside the house, locked the doors, then gathered in the central living room. Nobody wanted to leave for fear of what was outside. We all stayed up that night because the wall pounding was more violent than it had ever been. Bam, 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 all night like the ticking of some demonic clock. I didn't sleep for 2 days after this event. Event 6, Lost Time. I was walking through the woods near the Bellwitch Cave. One moment, it was completely sunny and blue skies about mid-afternoon. The next moment, it was overcast and looked like maybe 4 p.m. Event 7. Night terrors, torture dreams, being held down and brutally drawn and quartered, dreams of walking through the house and the void person placing their hand on my chest and pushing through my solar plexus, body violently shaking in the dream, like having a seizure. Event 8. Visited the Bell House plantation marker in a tobacco field adjacent to my family's property. Brought friends to try and prove that something crazy was happening to my family. The rite of passage in the area is to go to the stone marker where the paranormal events happened hundreds of years ago, then dance on the stone saying, "I don't believe in the Bell Witch." I got them to promise that they wouldn't do that while we went. Of course, the moment we get there, one guy who doubted the legends in a massive way jumps up onto the stone marker and starts screaming, "I don't believe in the Bell Witch," as loud as he could. I get so upset at him. I'm the only one that knows the way back. So I said, "Come on, guys, we're leaving." In this area, it's known as the Tennessee River Valley. So there's tons of flowing water, etc., around these tobacco fields. The reason this is important is because of what happened next. We're making good time walking back across this crop field, hundreds of yards long. A mist starts rolling in from the river bends and begins to saturate the field. The temperature drops easily 25 degrees or so, and we start seeing our breath. I begin to smell sulfur in the breeze. As the mist became a fog, it began. I started hearing this wheezy and deeply cavernous sounding breath around us, like being inside a cave that was breathing. Out of nowhere, we started hearing these giant blasting sounds, and I realized something was walking on the chopped tobacco stalks. Side note: when they harvest tobacco, they use a machete and cut down at a 45-degree angle, leaving about 3.5 feet of brittle stalk poking out of the ground. When you step on said stalks, they disintegrate in a very loud way as they burst apart. This starts happening all around us, like an army of native spirits running around as if we were in a bandwagon battle. The blasts were coming from every single direction in the fog. That's when I hear it. That deep, cavernous noise turns into this giant sniffing sound, like some Lovecraftian beast smelling its prey, just out of eyesight. At this point, I yell, "Run," in pure panic mode. We take off across the field, trying not to trip and be skewered on the stalks. They dry out and get really sharp where they harvest them. Also, Robertson County is the world's largest producer of tobacco per square mile. So these fields are everywhere. Fun fact. As we are exiting the field and our feet hit the gravel road, the lower center part of my back suddenly explodes in agony. I look down, and there's a massive rock laying at my feet, and I realized that I had just been assaulted. By the time I got to my house and examined my back in a mirror, the bruise was about the size of a basketball and was already turning black. Event 8. Woke up outside about 3 in the morning. I was laying next to the 4 graves on the property. The night was awfully cold, but I woke up soaked in sweat. We lived there for so long that I have many events to share, process, and willing to have discussions about my time there with you all. It is really hard for me to talk about this stuff without re-traumatizing myself. But my friends and family are encouraging me to share my experiences with like-minded people, so I can try to find peace surrounding my trauma. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any scary stories you want me to read, please suggest them down below. If you enjoy these types of videos, make sure to subscribe, as I have a lot more on the way. And yeah, stay spooky. I'll see you next time. Bye.